So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Beekeeping and the Asian Giant Hornet webinar. My name is Carla Salp, and I'm the Public Engagement Specialist with the Washington State Department of Agriculture and an agency spokesperson regarding the Asian Giant Hornet. I will be moderating this evening's webinar that we are presenting in collaboration with Washington State University and the Washington State Beekeepers Association. Today we'll be hearing from Cassie Chehorse, the Asian Giant Hornet Outreach Specialist for the department, who will give a brief overview of Asian Giant Hornet and WSDA's response. WSDA's role is primarily detection and eradication. When it comes to answering questions about beekeeping and management practices, that is where Washington State University steps in. Tonight we'll hear from Tim Lawrence with Washington State University Extension. Tim will be addressing Asian Giant Hornet issues for beekeepers specifically. When Tim completes his presentation, there will be a question and answer session. Please hold your questions until that time. Chris Looney with WSDA's Entomology Lab and Katie Buckley, the WSDA Pollinator Health Coordinator, will also be available for questions at that time as well. Before we begin, a few reminders. In order for the best video and audio quality for all participants, we'd like to ask everyone to not connect using your webcam. That's going to save a lot of bandwidth for us. After the presentations, we will open for questions. To ask a question, please use the raise your hand function, and I will call on you and unmute your line so that you can ask your question. Alternatively, you can submit a question using the chat function, and I'll ask that question for you. We do ask your patience if we experience some bumps as we work through technology. We do hope you to make a recording of the webinar available within the next few days as well. Assuming all goes well, the video will be posted on our YouTube channel, Facebook page, and on our website. I would also like to point you to some helpful resources. Information about Asian Giant Hornets can always be found on WSDA's website at agr.wa.gov/hornets. In addition to the website, you can subscribe to WSDA's news releases, blog, and the pest program email listserv to receive alerts about Asian Giant Hornets, or join our Asian Giant Hornet Watch Facebook group to connect with others who are interested in following this project. Links to all of those resources are available on our website. Now is also the time to start trapping for Asian Giant Hornets. Citizen scientists can help detect Asian Giant Hornets by placing traps on their property if they live in Washington State. Information on building the bottle traps is available on our website. With that, we are ready to begin our webinar. Cassie, I'm going to unmute your line, if I can scroll down to you there. And one last reminder before we get started, please keep your line muted so that we don't get a lot of feedback. When we have a presenter presenting, I can't do the mute all function to get rid of that background noise. So if you keep your own line muted, that will really be helpful for our sound quality. Thanks. Go ahead, Cassie.
All right, my name is Cassie, and I am the Asian Giant Hornet Community Outreach and Education Specialist with the WSDA. Tonight, I'm going to be talking to you about Vespa mandarinia, more commonly known as the Asian Giant Hornet. You might have also heard it called the Japanese hornet, yak killer hornet, or giant sparrow bee. So what is an Asian Giant Hornet? Next slide, please. The Asian Giant Hornet is the largest hornet in the world, and adults can range between 1.5 to 2 inches in length. You can identify the Asian Giant Hornets by their large orange head and the yellow and orange bands on their abdomen. They're native to Asia and most observable from Japan and Korea. They like subtropic to moderate temperatures. So how do Asian Giant Hornets compare to native species? It is important to note the difference between Asian Giant Hornets because many native species are mostly beneficial and serve an important role in Washington's ecosystem. By looking at the picture on the right, you can see differences in sizes, colors, stripings, and even wing patterns. Where does an Asian giant hornet's nest live? Next slide, please. Asian giant hornets typically nest in the ground in hollows. These hollows can come from conifer roots, tree trunks, and even rodent burrows. Nests can be more than 2 feet wide and contain hundreds of adult hornets. It's rarely recorded that hornets nest above ground in hollow trees. The next slide, I'll show you a video of a single Asian giant hornet around its nest. In September of 2019, an Asian giant hornet nest was found in Nanaimo, British Columbia in a forest park. This nest was eradicated and destroyed. So what is an Asian giant hornet's life cycle like, and when is it active? In March through April, mated queens start their colonies. Moving into June and September, workers will begin to emerge. They'll hunt insects, and there may be an occasional honeybee predation. However, moving into mid-August to November is when Asian giant hornets will prey on honeybee colonies. Moving later into September to December, queens will begin to mate and disperse. It's noted that one nest can produce over 300 new queens. Unfortunately, the dispersal distance of mated queens is unknown. However, we do know that some related species can travel up to 18 miles. Moving into the winter, December through March, queens will winter while the male workers die. So why is this important to beekeepers? A few Asian giant hornets can kill an entire hive in a few hours. They'll do this in 3 phases. They start off by hunting, where individual hornets will catch bees and return them to their nests. They'll then move into a slaughter phase, where hornet workers will mark the nests with a pheromone, bringing in the other Asian giant hornets to capture bees, behead them, and drop them to the ground. Following that, they will occupy the nest, wander the hive, take the pupae and larvae back to their own nest for food. It's noted in Japan that 20 hornets can destroy a beehive in 1 to 6 hours, and on average, it takes 105 minutes to kill a hive. Again, this behavior is most common in the fall. So what can you do to help prevent this from happening? It's important to report any suspected Asian giant hornet sighting to the WSDA. When reporting, it's important to include details like the location and the date you saw the insect. If you can safely obtain a photo, submit that with your report. If you come across a dead specimen, collect it in case the WSDA needs to test it. And where do you report these sightings to? You can report the sightings 3 different ways. You can go online to our website at agr.wa.gov/hornets. You can call our hotline at 1-800-443-6684, and you can email us at hornets@agr.wa.gov. If you're interested in connecting with others about Asian giant hornets and different activities through Facebook, join our group at facebook.com/groups/hornets. So you might be wondering if these reports confirm any detections. There are 5 confirmed detections in Whatcom County. In the fall of 2019, 3 detections were confirmed in Blaine. 2 out of 3 of these have been determined to be workers. This year, in May, a mated queen was reported in Custer, followed by a June report of a queen in Bellingham. Unfortunately, the collection from Bellingham was flattened, and we were unable to determine if it was mated. Based on these reports, surveys are underway to locate and eradicate any additional nests. And what type of surveys are we doing? In the spring, we deployed 60 experimental sap traps with the help of local beekeepers. We did this due to research from Japan and Korea indicating that a queen Asian giant hornet shows a strong preference to feed on oak tree sap when they emerge. We created sap traps by making small wounds in a tree and placing a sticky trap around the wound. Following the sap traps, we began to deploy Asian giant hornet bottle traps. The bottle trap placement is determined by creating a response grid. Next slide, please. On the left picture, you can see our first response grid. This is based off the 3 detections from Blaine. We created an 8-kilometer grid by using the hornet's location as a radius. However, the June detection did not fall in the Blaine response grid. Through the right picture, you can see where we created a new survey based on the Bellingham location. The WSDA is deploying over 400 bottle traps, but to hopefully detect and limit the Asian giant hornet spread, trapping has become a joint collaboration. Joint efforts in trapping include collaboration with beekeepers, different stakeholders, cooperators, and many citizen scientists who want to keep Washington clear of invasive species. So far, over 1,100 bottle traps have been set due to this joint effort. What comes next if we detect any Asian giant hornets? Our next step would be to locate and destroy the nest by using thermal imaging cameras. Following that, we will destroy the nests with insecticides. However, we're asking you to not try and eradicate any suspected nests. If you happen to suspect a nest or hive being attacked, please keep at least 10 feet away for your safety. There's strict safety procedures to protect workers when eradicating, including special hornet suits to be used. This concludes my presentation. However, I have a special note from the Pollinator Task Force to share with you, so I'm going to turn this presentation over to Katie Buckley.
Hi, I'm Katie Buckley. I'm the Pollinator Health Coordinator for the WSDA. I am in charge of running a pollinator health task force for the state. We have a number of different stakeholders on it. At this count, we have over 30 people on this task force. If anybody listening to this is interested in what our recommendations are to the legislature that we are in the process of developing, please feel free to contact me. Anyone is welcome and encouraged to review and comment on our recommendations. I will also be running a pollinator program as these recommendations are put through the legislature. Basically, I am the catch-all for all pollinator-related issues that are not strictly Asian giant hornet related or have to do with hive registrations, which would go to Leah Doyle still. Anyway, that's all for me.
Thanks, Katie. And I've had a few requests from folks to allow them to annotate. Unfortunately, it gives me a message also saying that I'll lose control if you annotate, so I'm unable to accommodate those requests. My apologies. That ends the WSDA portion of the Asian giant hornet and beekeeping webinar. We're now going to move into WSU's presentation with Timothy Lawrence.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're all in a deep breath and just relaxing a little bit and enjoying some of this presentation. So honeybees and the Asian giant hornet. It is an area that we need to be concerned about. Next slide. Hello. So the Apis cerana, or the Asian honeybee, has evolved with the Asian giant hornet. And so they have a defense mechanism that where they actually permit the scout hornets to enter into the colony, and then by some mechanism which is not completely understood, they will all jump on the hornet in mass and form a bee ball. And any of you who are familiar with beekeeping have probably seen bees balling queens or predators at some point. So you're familiar with the overall concept of bee balling. But this actually increases the temperature to a level where just above where the honeybee or just above where the hornet is susceptible to that temperature, and but below where the bees are susceptible. However, about 25% of the honeybees do die as a result of this ball, but it's very effective in eliminating the hornets going into the slaughter phase. And the slaughter phase is a relatively, it's not as common as one might think. It doesn't always occur. So but when they do, and when they get in that high protein demand, they will go out and try and enter a colony and kill it off. So I have heard some suggestions that, well, we should bring Apis cerana into the United States and work with them, but it is really not a good idea. Matter of fact, it is a terrible idea. It is does not perform as well in as the Apis mellifera does, and it has some pests that I'll talk about a little later that we really do not want in the United States. It is a separate species, so there is not a likelihood of a hybridization either. So, next slide. So the poor European honeybee, it did not evolve with the Asian honeybee, and it is a tasty morsel for them. During the hunting phase, the hornet will capture the bee. They're rather relatively clumsy, so they don't capture honeybees in the air very well, but they will wait outside the entrance of the hive and grab onto them and fly up to a tree, kind of mash the bee up into a meatball, and then take that back to the colony. But they're also predaceous on species as well, including yellow jackets, other wasps, and other insects. But the honeybee is a good protein source for them. Next slide. The only time that you have to be really concerned is, as Casey mentioned, in that latter stage of later in August into November, when there is a high protein demand within the nest, the hornet's nest. There is a carbohydrate demand for the hornet early on in the season, and as the queen is laying workers and the colony or the nest is building up in population and in size. But once they hit a certain point in its end of August or thereabouts, the queen stops laying the worker eggs, laying of queen and drone, or the reproductive phase of the hornet. And so there is a huge demand. The cells are enlarged; they're slightly larger than the worker cell, and the huge protein demand for the nest. That is when they will, if they're going to get into a slaughter phase. Again, it's not something that always happens, but if they do get into that slaughter phase, that's where they are going to have that huge protein demand. And by attacking the honeybee colony, wiping out the adults, which they do not consume, they are then able to enter the colony, and they feed first on the older pupa, and then as time goes on, or the pupa are depleted, they will start to carry back the larva to the nest. Very rich in fat, very protein rich. And this is also a phase where they will put out guards in front of the honeybee colony to protect, and they can be very aggressive and defensive during that phase. So, it's any type of mechanism that you might want to put on your colony. You would not want to do that prior to for the August. I've heard some suggestions of where we can just put on an excluder or keep the hornets out. Can everyone mute their voice, please? We're getting some feedback here. But you have to also remember that there are drones within that colony, and you do not want to inhibit the drones from being able to get out of the colony and go on their mating flight. But so putting on an excluder or some type of entrance that drones cannot fit through will result in the drones piling up on the backside of it to the point where they will literally clog off the entrance. And we have a lot of experience on this with instrumentally inseminated queens, where we'll put an excluder on the front of the hive prior to the queen actually starting to lay. And we always have to go in and make sure that we don't have a buildup of drones in the colony during that period of time. So you do not want to inhibit the entrance of the colony prior to the season when the possibility of the slaughter phase will begin. Next slide. So, and it's also good to take a deep breath and realize where we're at with this whole process. You know, I kind of like to look at it as it being in 3 phases, and we're still very much in phase 1. The WSDA is trying to determine what extent of the infestation we actually have. It's not surprising that we're not finding a lot of workers right now, because the hornet's nest, if they're out there, are not that large yet. But as we go into August, there will be more workers flying around, and the chances of actually finding the workers will greatly increase as time goes on. If it is determined that there is a significant infestation, then they will go into the eradication phase, where they will try and eliminate any known nests. And this may go on, and WSDA, Chris will probably be able to explain this. It would probably take a 3 to 5 year period before a negative declaration can be had that the eradication strategy has been successful. If we are not able to eradicate, and we have continually increase in the number of hornets available, that phase of how do we protect our colonies, and how do we properly defend, and what strategies do we need to take. And that might be putting on some type of trap in front of the colony. It may be for migratory beekeepers that they simply move out of areas, depending on how far the range actually happens. So there are a number of strategies we can look at. So there's really, time to figure out exactly how we're going to approach this. Next slide. So this is a friend of mine over in Japan, sent me a few pictures of the types of traps that she is using on her colonies. I'll show you a citation of a paper that I think it's readily available. It's not the only publication out there, but it's readily available. But these are exclusion traps that will help keep the hornet away from the colony, but also the hornets fly in at the bottom of the trap and then fly up and out and are trapped in the upper entrance. But there's a number of factors that are going on here that help minimize the detriment to the colony. If you put on an excluder in front of the colony, the honeybee has that instinct of going out and attacking anything that is a danger to the colony. And so, if you have just an excluder in front, they may respond to try and attack the hornets coming in, and you're just making it easier for the hornets to be able to kill the honeybees. Our Japanese colleagues have done a lot of work on developing and perfecting these types of nests that allow the bees to be able to exit the colony without getting, and keep the hornets far enough away where they don't get into that attack mode. Bees don't get into attack mode. So that, I have seen some, at least one beekeeper that has sent me his schematic and is trying to come up with a design that works for U.S. beekeeping operations that would work. I really don't see this as a viable option for commercial beekeepers or any type of migratory beekeeper moving, other than that you take these things on and take them off. But we really need to look at our Japanese colleagues and the really centuries of experience they have in dealing with the Asian giant hornet. So next slide. So this is the paper, take note, I've put the citation down. If you just Google that name, it is available free it's on several websites. It is perhaps, it's a little bit dated, but it really gives you a good overview. They actually are looking at a number of different Vespa species, but the concentration is primarily on the Asian giant hornet and about it covers just about everything you want to know about the Asian giant hornet, but we're afraid to ask. But this diagram particularly shows that in addition to the trap I just showed, they also will just put screens in front of the colonies as a cost savings measure. The screen, and it can be a newspaper in front of it, he talks about, to kind of deter the hornet from attacking or coming after this particular colony, but having the traps at a ratio of about 1 to 5. I've also seen later on in the paper, he actually describes some beekeepers who are doing it at a rate of 1 to 20. So not every colony needs to have that trap in front. They are able to use the screen or newspaper. Also under C, they put in some type of a glass or kind of a slick material that at the top entrance that prohibits the hornet, or makes it more difficult for the hornet to be able to hang out at the entrance and grab the bees as they exit. The problem with all of this is that the hornets get wise to most of these systems and have workarounds, but it at least gives some ways of being able to protect the colony as best as possible. If you email me, I would be happy to send you a link to this if you didn't write down that information. So next slide. So that's actually a stinger of Asian giant hornet. It's significant. Is that our next biggest concern, or that we have? Next slide. I think not. I think it's going to pale in comparison to what we've had to deal with the varroa mite and the problems that it is causing the beekeeping industry. I think the hornet will be minimal compared to what we've had to deal with the varroa mite. Next slide. And what we do not want is the Tropilaelaps, which is a mite that's actually somewhat smaller than the varroa mite, considerably smaller than the varroa mite. It is found on Apis cerana, where it is a minor pest, but it is a major pest for Apis mellifera. That is, if no other reason, we do not want Apis cerana in the United States for the fear and the danger of bringing in Tropilaelaps. It was Apis cerana has been found extensive eradication primarily because of Tropilaelaps. This is a mite that will really decimate and will make varroa seem like a minor pest in comparison. So it is absolutely vital that we keep Apis cerana out of the United States. Next slide. So my message to you, don't panic, take a deep breath. We got time, but it is a concern. We got to be careful. So with that, I'd like, tried to leave some time for for questions, and I noticed that Gashi is on the call as well, so he can probably give us some words of wisdom as well, because he's had the direct experience with being able to work with him. So with that, let's have questions.
All right, thanks, Tim. Just a reminder, obviously we're taking questions now. Please use the raise your hand function and I can call on you and unmute you. That does take a little bit of time. We've got almost 100 people on here and I have to unfortunately scroll through the list. So you can raise your hand if you have a question that you'd like to ask. The other option is that you can submit a question through using the chat function and I will answer those questions. So again, I'm still getting requests to annotate, and unfortunately I can't allow that right now. And my computer froze up for a second there. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions yet. Don't be shy if you have one. Okay, we do have some questions coming in over chat. So one says, what if you find a hornet at your hive? If they decimate in 6 hours, shouldn't you kill them first and ask questions later? I'm not sure if Chris or Tim wants to take that one. I'll let you guys fight for it.
Yeah, I would say kill it. Especially if it's just an individual. WSDA probably can't say this, but I can. In that our colleagues in Japan have advised that getting good badminton rackets are a good way of wiping out the hornet. They're clumsy in the air. They're relatively easy targets. And so my wife was over in Japan and she said there were badminton rackets all over some of the apiaries. So yeah, I would kill it. I wouldn't mess around with it.
But then save it and report it to us.
I was just going to say, I would like to add that. So if people are interested in seeing in North America how clumsy and easy to catch or whack these are, if you find the video of the nest destruction on Nanaimo Island, or in Nanaimo on Vancouver Island, I think there's a scene that in the video where they just whack the hornet with a stick. They find a straggler the next day, and it's that easy. It's like hunting grouse. So.
Okay, next question is, if Asian giant hornet becomes established, what will the range be?
So this is Chris Looney, WSDA. Our colleagues at Washington State University just completed a preliminary model, actually, to try and predict this. It's based just on climatic factors, so it is a relatively simple model. It means it doesn't include things like competitors or aspects of habitat that might not be reflected in the climate. So it is imperfect, but it basically suggests that the Pacific Northwest is pretty good habitat all the way down to I think it was the Arcata area, maybe the San Francisco Bay Area, with the exception of the Columbia Basin and Great Basin interior. The Rocky Mountains don't look so good. The Plain States don't look so good. But the East Coast, basically everywhere there is forest from the Atlantic Ocean to about where the plains start, looks like it's going to be very good habitat. So the species has a fairly wide geographic range, even if it's not super abundant everywhere it is, and that certainly informed that model's predictions. So the milder areas of North America that are forested seem to be the potential habitat.
But Chris, we'll also have to put through in a word of caution that there's a lot of variables that can go into that. Vespa cabro was to into the United States in 1850s, and it has never migrated, to my knowledge, to the West Coast. So there are a lot of factors that come into play with migratory patterns.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The ability to disperse over those inhospitable areas has clearly kept that one at bay. So yeah, nice. Thanks, Tim.
So this is a related question. Chances of seeing these in southeastern Washington or the Tri-Cities area?
We believe that it is low.
Great.
based, under their own power. Now, if I drive one over there and drop it off, you would see it. But we believe that it would be very difficult for them to get there on their own, and they would find it inhospitable habitat.
Great. Somebody's submitted a question about how to change the location of their trap, which was logged on our public map. I'll just go ahead and ask you to give us a call at 1-800-443-6684 or email us at either hornets@agr.wa.gov or agtrapping@agr.wa.gov. And I'll put those in the chat so you don't have to write them all down. But somebody from our staff can help you change the location of your trap. So question, how far away from the hives do you recommend putting the traps? This is a question from Walla Walla.
Away from which trap are you talking about?
So how far away from a honeybee hive should you put the bottle traps with the orange juice and cooking rice wine in them if you're trapping and you're a beekeeper?
Chris, I'll let you answer that one.
Oh, so I don't actually know. So this question is about, if I can read some into it, I assume you're kind of weighing what is the risk of capturing my bees versus maybe attracting a hornet closer to my bees. And I simply don't have any knowledge that would give you an informed opinion about that. Tim can probably maybe relate how beekeepers in Japan place their traps. I will say that we have now processed 500 and something traps, citizen traps and our own, and we've only captured a handful of bees. Well, 2 handfuls by now. So
yeah, they're not that attractive. Don't tell the WSDA, but I didn't register my trap, but I still used them around. They're great for catching yellow jacket queens, so it was worked well. Well, and I have about 80 hives on my home location, and I think maybe have caught 1 or 2. So honeybees are not overly attracted to them.
Thanks, guys. So next question is, assuming that there was a hive that successfully overwintered from 2019, are there any estimates on survival rate of queens the following week, as in percentage based on similar climates in Japan? That's the question.
I'm going to answer that and assume that it means the following spring. And the answer is we're not entirely sure. For a couple of reasons. One, there may be some existing data in Japan that addresses it. Oh, that's right, Archer. Have you read that paper, Tim? Archer?
Yeah.
Anyway, the short answer is it's a very, very small percentage. And presumably it would be even lower, or possibly even lower here, where you're dealing with the kind of things that limit population success when population is very small, like inbreeding, and dealing with new pathogens or slightly different kinds of climates. So it is small, but it's not small enough for us to be concerned. For us to not be concerned.
And they start producing reproductives, in September and whatnot, and so those are emerging and going out on out to mate. They actually mate on the ground. The drone worker, the drones are waiting out in front of the entrance for them, and so those get inseminated and make it through. But the ones later in the season, even though they're still being produced, may not have a chance for copulation to occur, and they'll go uninseminated. Now, those uninseminated queens may survive the winter, but they're not going to establish a new nest. I don't recall the percentage either, but it's relatively small. But they do put out a number of reproductives that do not get inseminated.
And actually, on that note, some of the literature suggests that as little as 30% of queens will successfully mate. So, can be low.
Thanks. So there's the next question. Somebody just wanted to confirm that they build their nest in the ground.
Yes. Almost always. There are some very rare reports of nests in structures. I think there are 3 recorded from Japan, and then another handful I read about in India, perhaps Nepal. But I mean, this is like 5 or something like that out of the thousands of recorded nests. So, you know, never say never, but functionally, the ground is what we're really thinking about and what we're concerned about right now. And there is ample ground habitat for them in nesting habitat in Washington State.
Great. Next question is, when hanging traps, does the species of tree used have any impact? For example, oak versus fir, etc.
I don't know. Do you, Tim?
No, I don't. I don't think it makes any difference. You know, at that point, you know, they're, you know, they do go after sap early on, and the hornets prefer oak sap over other types of sap. But you know, I don't think where you hang your trap is going to make that much difference.
Okay, next question is, when and how can we get the media to stop calling these the murder hornets? I'll take that one since I deal with the media. So we can't get them to stop. We can politely ask them to stop and give our good reasons for why we don't want them to be called murder hornets. And I have noted, by the way, that people are, reporters are starting to use Asian giant hornets more. And obviously we don't like the term murder hornets, but you know, the silver lining is it has created a massive amount of public awareness. People are at least aware of Asian giant hornets now. So, you know, there's a silver lining there, even though we are working, and we're appreciate everybody who encourages people to use the term Asian giant hornets instead of murder hornets. So next, is there a specific type of is there a specific type of tree species where the Asian giant hornet tends to prefer to build their nests?
Well, they build it in the ground, so.
I mean, if you look at this in the literature, you'll see phrases like tend to be associated with coniferous forests and things like that. But you know, who knows? That doesn't really get to the level of an individual tree, and that also just reflects generally the habitat where lots of the literature is from. So yeah, we just don't really know that.
They're going to take advantage of any opportune place to build a nest. So.
Great. That looks like all of the questions that have come in through chat. If you do have one more question, please submit it right away. I'm going to look through the attendee list one more time just to make sure there's no hands raised waiting to ask a question. No, looks like we're good. Oh, one more question popped in.
Huh.
I think we've answered this one, but just to reiterate one more time, if we were to have a spread, how far and how fast would it spread south?
Actually, that's a little different. That's a different nuance, and it's something we cannot predict very well for the species because so little is known about its dispersal behavior and capabilities. Our modeling, we used a couple of different estimates of near and far, of short and long dispersal, and I'm not even, how about I say this? In Europe, a similar species has been established, Vespa velutina, and it has different spread rates across the continent that seem to be associated both with human-assisted spread and the ability for it to move easily across a geographically complex landscape. And the rates are as low as 8 kilometers a year in some places and as high as 78 kilometers a year. It's a huge range. Those are the kind of things we tried to accommodate when we modeled it. And what we're left feeling is that we don't really know the actual likely rate, but none of the options seemed good, and we want to really try to stop it as far north as possible.
Well, so next question. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to respond, Tim?
Reading the question, so go ahead and ask it first.
So we have a lot of rat and rabbit burrows and holes at our hive site. Should we worry more about these burrows? It's almost impossible to plug them up.
First of all, I wouldn't worry at all right now. I would just relax a little bit. But you know, they are going to take advantage of anything, and they're going to want to have an entrance that is defendable from the video that was shown, looks like a rabbit hole size to me. So, plugging them is probably not going to be. I'd wait until you actually have a nest there, and then call the WSDA and come out in his zoot suit and take care of it.
The video of the hornet buzzing around house is slightly misleading in that the night before the beekeepers that took that nest out had already been in there rooting about in the ground. But what Tim said, they're pretty opportunistic when it comes to nesting sites, and in fact, if there is any kind of main limitation or not, draw or something like that, it's that the hornet queens seem to start with relatively small nests or small openings. So, but it varies a lot, and not only should you not worry, like Tim said, plugging up potential holes in our landscape is never going to be a manageable strategy for the hornet. We just can't keep it from nesting sites. So if you plug one rabbit hole, it's going to find something else that you never even thought of. So don't sweat it.
Okay, there was a question about whether this will be available. Yes, we are should say, yes, we hope so. We're recording it, and assuming that the recording works out, then it will be available on YouTube, Facebook, and our website, hopefully within the next couple of days. All right, one last check, and I think that's about all the questions that we've had come in. But if you do ever have any questions, if it's around beekeeping specifically, Tim Lawrence is your best contact for that. If it's about trapping or eradication, detections, those kinds of things, WSDA is going to be your best contact.
So it looks like another question came in for the USDA or WSDA, excuse me.
Sure. So thank you for highlighting that for me. I had to scroll down a little bit further. Is it possible to assist WSDA in attending an eradication just for the experience?
Almost certainly no, is the answer.
Yeah, you don't want you don't want to have to wear one of the suits that was shown earlier in the slides.
Sorry, to elaborate, we actually have developed a fairly rigorous safety protocol. My boss has already forced us to go through it a few times, inspecting suspect nests in the field that didn't turn out to be the case. We don't have that many suits. We put them on before we even approach the area. We have licensed pesticide applicators that are going to be administering the toxic dust that we'll be using to kill them. It's fairly complicated. It's loaded with litigious opportunity, and so it's probably not. But I do know that Carla intends to document this on video when we get around to being good at it. So yeah.
Well, hopefully you will not get good at it.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yes. So very unlikely. A question, are we going to attempt queen trapping again next spring?
I don't know. We don't know. The sap trapping that we attempted this year didn't work out really very well. That was the thing we were most excited about trapping and about trying because of that strong attraction to oak sap. And what we've learned from our foresters since then is that our sap flow just doesn't really seem to occur at the right time without damaging trees pretty significantly. So we're probably not going to try that, but we are hoping to experiment with those oak sap volatiles and identify attractive chemicals in those so that we can maybe, if we need to, lay the groundwork for developing traps that are specific to queens. But probably because queen density is so low, if you recall back, there were questions about how many will successfully overwinter, and the reality is it's relatively few. It just seems like queen trapping with a density as low as what we hope and think we have is not a super effective strategy.
Okay, and then we mentioned using pesticide dust. There was a question about which dust you're planning on using.
I don't remember the name. It's a dust commonly used in eradicating hornets and yellow jacket nests.
So I think it's Tempo.
Yeah, I'm not a pesticide guy, so sorry.
I just seem to remember that. I could be wrong though. All right, I think that's the end of our questions. one more look here. Somebody pops one in there on me. Okay, well, looks like we have answered all the questions. Thanks everyone for participating today. Again, we have lots of answers about all kinds of stuff on our website at agr.wa.gov/hornets. And so that's a great place to get information. We also have a beekeeping section on there that has information for beekeepers, and we post all the information that Washington State University puts together as well. So with that, we will end the webinar, and thank you so much for participating.
Go Cougs.